Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining Africa News Network First Fast Live. My name is Cindy Mabi. The ANC leadership has met with the disgruntled members at Lotuli House in a bid to end the 68 missing votes saga. ANC lawyer Agent Shagan confirmed the meeting to ANN7 and described it as constructive. The lawyer says the parties engaged information on what they perceive to have happened at the elective conference, but did not come out with any conclusion. Another round of talks will take place in January next year. The disgruntled members, mostly from Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal, and believed to be Senzo Mchunu supporters, are demanding for a second verification on the numbers. This is despite the new ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule clarifying that only 16 of the missing votes were valid and counted in the final tally.
We've not come to any finality on the meeting. This was pretty much an exploratory meeting to find out where each party was. They told us what their grievances were. We explained to them our procedures. We've agreed to exchange further documentation and information during the early part of January next year, and hopefully we should have the matter resolved before too long.
The party's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has requested that the 68 votes be ignored and that there be unity. It remains to be seen whether this particular meeting will yield any positive results and remove the cloud surrounding the Secretary General position. For ANN7, I am Cindy Siwatwala, Lutuli House.
Joining us live in studio, Tsepo Khadima and Jackie Shandu, political analysts. Good evening to you, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us. How come we're still sitting with this matter that we thought was resolved in the steering committee in the National Elective Conference? What do you make out of now a further proposal for consultation, Jackie?
Look, it doesn't augur well for the newly elected leadership structure of the ANC at national. It doesn't augur well at all, because what it effectively says is that the matter is not buried. So there's this specter of the Secretary General votes debacle that haunts this new leadership, which we know is not necessarily a united leadership, doesn't come from the same slate, So even without this, they had quite a number of things, to deal with, so that they are able to gel, they are able to unite and say, look, even though coming to this platform as leaders of the African National Congress, we represented various views which were different, but let's now find a way of working together. This is not helping them. I think this needs a political solution, and it's not even helping the fact that there are lawyers involved, which means already this is a signal of a possible court action. One would have thought the ANC had taken very decisive decisions about members and how they conduct themselves during disputes.
And the question around the new leadership as well, sitting with this fresh possible litigation, speaks of generally the ANC's inability to deal with dissatisfaction amongst members, especially if they don't have the desired outcome of a particular process. Tsepo, in your view, how to best manage this particular impasse?
Well, I think it's going to be post-2019 when they eventually get to sort it out or go through all the legal processes, because eventually I think the matter will end up in the Constitutional Court, because they are taking what is a political matter and make it a legal matter, as Jackie is saying, and he's quite correct. But if anything, it is indicative of the importance of that office of Secretary General, that the stakes are so high. Yes, there can be all manner of pretense that unity is sacrosanct and unity is what must rule the day, but their action betrays that mantra of unity on the basis that by now, particularly with the aggrieved party, because we understand that those so-called, the people that are saying they are representing this so-called 68 votes, that were cast in a manner that itself is not clear as to whether or not it conformed to the rules, the established rules of the commission or of the Electoral Commission. The question becomes exactly what information do they have which they did not possess at the time of the announcement and the elections themselves being declared to be valid. So I think what is happening is that it's just going to raise more questions. And the risk that the African National Congress sits with now is effectively that the process could eventually all entirely or altogether be invalidated and that they be ordered to start afresh. Can they do that? I don't think that they can do that. But also it's very surprising that the meeting is now held with ANC lawyers. So the question becomes, well, who actually from the ANC is giving instruction to the lawyers for the ANC? And also these other people who, what is the basis that their grievance could outweigh the will of the people? Because this past election, the elective conference, I think the fundamental question that has to be asked was the will of the people adequately expressed? Taking into account that 500 or so people could not vote, either that they were disqualified by the processes in leading up or during the nominations, that they somehow, many of them didn't make the cut, and then 105 were disqualified by the courts. So again, that is a much more greater number than 68. 500, they actually have more a legitimate reason to actually have been approaching the courts than the very few who can't even fill a microbus taxi to go home that are approaching the courts. But the work of the elections or the electoral committee that presided over this ANC National Elective Conference, the Latin is used there that they are functus officio. I don't know why they have not approached them, because if there are any issues with regard to processes, they should be directed at the door of this electoral commission than at the door of the ANC. So I think that they are misdirected by all and all, but politically is going to hurt the ANC because it will lead to hardening of attitudes, and hardening of attitudes, unfortunately, is the deadliest disease known to mankind.
What was the error in legitimizing a flawed process, in the sense that there were the 68 votes that came in an envelope and were not necessarily even on the voters' roll? By admitting or the 16 others, do you think that that in itself was an error, as opposed to rather investigating the processes in itself of being procedurally correct?
Look, the first grave error that took place was the election agency not being decisive on what should happen to these 68 votes. And what they did was to say, look, you can vote, but we're not sure if your vote will be able to be counted. And that created some expectation, and they're haunted by that decision, because the decision should have been, look, you have not fully complied with the process, and therefore you're not allowed to vote. I don't think this matter would exist. But the fact that there was sort of very evasive, ambiguous, equivocal sort of stance taken by the election agency has now given rise. It has even bolstered, even psychologically, those who are saying, we were supposed to be part of the process, and we were delegates, and we were not, and we want also our will to be reflected in terms of the numbers. But I think what Tsepo is saying is critically important also to say, actually, even leading up to Nasrec, the process, the credibility of the process itself had seriously been flawed, could be called into question, because there are so many people across the country, Bujanala, the entire region, the PC of various provinces, it's a whole host of people that were meant to come and also add their voice in terms of the policies that the African National Congress adopts, as well in terms of the leadership that is supposed to adopt. And their voice has not been heard, they've been silenced. And if they can accept, it's an important question, what of the 15 or 68? Because we are told the calculation is 68, but only 15 would have gone to Senzo, which effectively means that he still would have lost. So I think Cyril Ramaphosa, this is his first challenge. He must show leadership. He must speak to Senzo. They were on the same slate. He must speak to his comrades in Limpopo. Senzo must speak to his comrades, his supporters in KZN, to say, look, we are here now. It was a conference of compromises, and there's no real winner. The ANC won. Let's move on. Let's focus on the bigger challenges we've adopted to nationalize the Reserve Bank. We've said we're going to give free education. You know, we've said we're going to expropriate land without compensation. Let's support the African National Congress in government to be able to immediately deliver on those promises.
Yeah. All right, let's have a voice or perspective from Levi Ndo. He is a political analyst joining us on the phone line. Good evening to you, Mr. Ndo, and thank you so much for your time. And just in how this could potentially derail the policy focus of the ANC, that of radical economic transformation, with all these court cases, some still pending, their appeals, do you think that this could taint the elective conference negatively?
Well, I think indeed that would, if indeed there are court cases that might happen, they would have a huge negative impact on the entire conference. But I think it's important to a little bit go back to the events that happened before conference. There were a number of court cases, and in which the courts judged that certain individuals or branches should not be represented at conference solemnly because wrong things were done. And that is why such decisions were taken. But I think it's also important, very important to note that when conference was on, there was an element of adopting credentials. And when credentials are adopted, it means that everybody or the conference has to continue legitimately. And that is very, very important. Lastly, the matter that relates to the elections of the SG, clarity was given at conference, and those who seem to be having other issues relating to the same issue were requested to go and have a discussion at Luthuli House on Friday, which is today. That will mean that the first test of the leadership is to address these kind of issues. But I think if you look at the spirit of the conference, which was mainly about unity, wherein there is no single faction that has won and only the ANC has won, I wouldn't expect any other form of court cases to come on the basis of the spirit of the conference and the clarity that was given on the same matter. All
right, Mr. Ndo, just stay on the line. We're taking calls on 011-203-5120. That's 203-5120. We have Mandla Emalahleni. Good evening to you. Mike will come to you in Pretoria. Hi, Mandla.
Hi, how are you, Cindy?
I'm very well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Pass my also greeting to Tepo and Jackie Shandler.
What's your comment or question?
Cindy, look, the will of the people, I think the will of the people has not been expressed. If you go back prior to the conference taking place, what has happened in Bojanal, in Northwest and Free State, I mean, the provinces that supported Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has been hard done by. The province, these court cases were not happening in other provinces like Gauteng, Mpumalanga, that were supporting Cyril Ramaphosa. Then you ask yourself, who was funding all this? Who was funding all these members of the ANC? That's Cyril Ramaphosa himself. It remains to be seen whether these policies are going to be implemented. But I bet, I don't see anything happening. Under the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa, I bet my friend. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. Another conspiracy, or whether the backers and the funders of the backers could be behind this. Mike in Pretoria, good evening to you.
Ma'am, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
No, fine, ma'am. I think it's the right way to go to the court because they are talking about the unit, but there's no unit there. How can allow people to put aside some votes for the people who had the right to vote? So that means we don't get a true reflection of the result of that day, especially for the SG. So the better way to do it, if they allow to happen, that means they are going back to practice the corruption. So we have to get it right in order to have a good unity. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mike. Much appreciated. I mean, this is a 106-year movement that ought to have had its processes seamless without any question. So if the 68 indeed were kept separately in some clandestine, dealt in a clandestine way, and then now adopted by the steering committee, that in itself is the foundation of the problem.
Look, I'm made to understand it's actually not 68 votes, but 61 that are in question. Because when you look at the 68, it's actually people who didn't show up. And of course, in any election, you might have a voter's roll. In this case, was 4,776. Out of the 4,776, 68 didn't show up. But additional to those that were on the voter's roll as so verified and adopted as credentials, they are made to understand that there were 61 others that somehow presented themselves. And because they were not on the voter's roll, meaning outside of the 4,776, hence they were put in an envelope. Now, that is already now a fundamental mistake number one, fundamental flaw, that a vote is only a valid vote if it is in the ballot box.
Right.
If it's in an envelope, it is not a vote. It doesn't matter whichever way that they ruled it.
Right.
And it would appear that it's not conspiracy theory, that somebody somewhere took a judgment call to have this 61 effectively as an umbrella for the rainy day. And the rainy day, we know that it lasted all for 1 minute and 23 seconds when Senzo Mchunu was elevated and made Secretary General for those 1 minute 23 seconds. And of course, when they came back to reality, then they realized overnight that, oh, we have got that umbrella there. Since it's now pouring, let's go and lift up the umbrella, which is what they did. Now, the question is that can that 61 be able to carry the day? I don't think it can carry the day. What effectively we saw coming out of this election, all of us, the analysts right across the country, nobody foresaw the outcome that has actually emerged here. However, this outcome, as much as they might want to celebrate it as unity, my own assessment that it is nothing but effectively a truce. It is not a peace accord.
Right.
It is a truce. It's a ceasefire. Right. And that ceasefire, how long will it hold? I'm not so sure that the ceasefire can hold that much longer. I can foresee already that there are signs that somebody is about to effectively declare that ceasefire null and void and say, now we go back to our old positions, and the old positions are along the lines of slates, and once they hold on to those positions, come 2019, the risk for the ANC today as we stand here is that even before the elections in 2019, they will probably find themselves being in opposition yet with a majority in parliament, because in government, they will be out. And they will be out, we'll have a coalition government coming in, and then come 2019, then they will really wake up to smell the coffee, because they will drop below 50% once they are no longer in government.
Jackie, do you agree that this is essentially about saving blushes, especially that embarrassing moment with the Senzo Mchunu's supporters now, raising him as the SG, and also secondly, why there seems to be a culture of expectancy, like you're entitled to a particular position as SG.
Right. Look, there are those elements, Cindy, but I think it's larger than that. I think I'm inclined to believe that the differences remain, the divisions, I think that it's a bittersweet victory for Cyril. That office of the Secretary General is of enormous importance in terms of driving the party political programs, but also in terms of influencing, what happens in the various sort of institutions where party members are deployed in governance, in parliament, in the legislatures and so on and so forth. So you have a guy that's supposedly emerged victorious, but his hands are tied because the secretariat, it would appear, is constituted by those who belong to the old order, who are known strong allies of Jacob Zuma. So he seems to just be caught in that place where he's a king that can't rule, So I think that he realizes that something's got to be done. There has to be some opening. But if they carry on with that, it can only further weaken the ANC. It's an already fragile ANC an already weak, an already divided ANC. And there's this delicate work that is being done to try and disarm these factions, to try and build genuine, real unity, not the unity that's declared and pronounced and demanded. You don't do that. That's not how it works.
Maybe what it needs is intervention and especially prayers. We have Reverend Dire from Bloemfontein. Good evening to you, Reverend Dire. Thanks for your time.
Yes, good evening, ma'am. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yes, Reverend, we're listening. What's your contribution?
Yeah, my contribution here. My contribution here is that.
Please turn down your TV set. It's giving us feedback.
Okay. All right. Okay. So.
No,
my contribution here is that it is very clear that the credibility of this team that led the elections is questionable, because where in the world where there is justice and fairness, the credential has been adopted by the whole delegates. Where in the world, after the elections has been adopted, the elections has been carried, and the top 6 has been announced, then there is a concern of a certain number of voters which was in an envelope. This whole thing of an envelope is discrediting this group that led that elections. And there is just one way. If President Ramaphosa means business about the corruption, eradicating corruption, here it is very clear, because the SG position, it is of a great influence in the ANC. Now, it is very clear, we are not just all, sorry to use this, we are not foolish politically. It is a very clear game. How long will he take Mr. Ramaphosa to intervene and to put his foot down and show up his leadership by quelling this problem and being done with it once and for all? This, since the beginning to date, what is his role? Where is his ability now of doing away with corruption?
Thank you so much, Reverend Dire in Bloemfontein, saying that CR must step up to the plate and quell this particular impasse. We have James in Mpangeni. Good evening to you, and thanks for joining us. Hi, James.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Your contribution, very briefly, please.
Yes, just very briefly. Dave, you've got two steps. You've got the credentials and you've got the voters' rolls. Now, if you take the 61 votes and you add them back, surely you should come back to the amount that is reflected in the credentials. I think this is a simple exercise in arithmetic. If those people were not there in the credentials, then surely their votes should not be counted.
James, thanks so much. James in Mpangeni. Levi, your view in that the process in itself should have been simple. It just needed a political decision in terms of the process going forward, whether the votes are included partially or they're included in totality. Hi, Levi. All right, I think we've lost Levi there. It's up on your view that it could have been prevented. I mean, we saw CR taking that posture to say he will decide, or rather trying to calm the tension and try and forge a way forward. But that in itself has created even a bigger mess.
Of course, and this is the biggest test that they have. If they allow this, it's a drip, 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 but it eventually opens up, a wall and it will fall apart. A political wall in this case, in that there are 500 who feel that strongly aggrieved that they were disenfranchised when they had a right. And they will also be buoyed by any positive outcome from the so-called 68 or 61. and therefore also bring their own litigation. So you have a dysfunctional organization. But why is the Secretary General position so important? There can be no one more worried than the Chief Whip of the ANC in Parliament, because this Secretary General will have a greater deal to say about who actually will be the Chief Whip of the party in Parliament.
Right.
They're also on the issue of who every single DG, director of any of the state-owned companies, chairs, CEOs of state-owned companies, now is going to be the privilege of a committee chaired by none other than David Mabuza, DD.
Right.
So, and who is the secretary to the deployment committee is none other than the Deputy Secretary General, Jesse Duarte. So you can really see why the tension is there, because effectively now it's indicative that perhaps there is still a camp, even though they are talking unit, there's still a camp that feels that they will not have a smooth decision-making process with regard to that position of SG not being in their camp. The problem then is the following. For as long as they keep quiet, for as long as they do not distance themselves from the course of action being pursued by the so-called 68 or the representative of the 68, they own the decision, and that can be none other than the president himself, Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as the aggrieved party, Senzo Mkhunu, that their silence means that they own the decision and that they are approving of it, and that can only make an already untenable situation worse.
We're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. And of course, we didn't quite get to the point of whether there is a third hand in this matter, orchestrating the divisions within the ANC and funding the litigation that we've seen facing the party. But thanks indeed. That's Sepho Khadima and Jackie Shandu, political analyst. And you at home, thanks indeed for calling as well. We'll take a quick break. Do stay with ANN7 Prime.